The police murder of George Floyd is far from the first such racist murder, but it is particularly blatant. It has also unleashed a tidal wave of protest, one which is expressing all the pent-up anger of recent years. This includes the ongoing racism, the economic crisis, and the insults and racism of the most demented president in U.S. history. Along the way to fighting for real change, this protest movement will do more to get Trump out than all the electioneering of the Democrats combined. Here is some video of how that movement is playing out in Oakland, where it is picking up where Occupy Oakland left off. One of the first nights marching through the streets, the response of drivers in the cars was really gratifying. The march continued that night. Using the excuse of some property damage, the mayor established an 8 p.m. curfew. Of course, there never was a curfew on the violence committed against human beings by the police, the landlords, and the capitalists in general. So the movement decided to challenge that curfew on Wednesday, June 8th. Something up to 10,000 people turned out. Here's some photos and video. It started out maybe a few hundred to 1,000, but it rapidly swelled to absolutely massive proportions. And there was not a cop in sight. One of the points made was that this struggle is international. Here is a poster from a Chilean comrade who makes the connection between Camilo Catrillanco, a Mapuche Indian murdered by the Chilean police, and George Floyd. The Somali Public Trade Union had also sent a message of solidarity, and over 100 copies of it were distributed at the protest. Here are a couple of the protesters reading that message. A commitment to fight against white supremacy, an understanding of who the cops are, real internationalism, and a clear understanding that it is capitalism that is at the root of all this. That is the basis for this movement to continue forward. All right. So, uh, so we're talking with Kieran here in Minneapolis. And Kieran, you are a member of what union?
I'm a member of the Communication Workers Local 7250.
And you've been active in the movement and in your union for a long time, right?
Yeah, I was a Teamster for 10 years, and now I've been in the CWA for 17.
So were you out there last night with the protests, Kieran?
I've been in and out of the protests since they began. I was with the first group that got in the intersection um, the day after it happened, and have been going back and forth. Last night I was actually kind of resting up, so I was home when the third precinct was taken, but I was sure enjoying watching it on TV.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about just the mood and that you're encountering and what people are saying in the street and so on?
Yeah, what I've been telling people and what I've seen firsthand is that it's really an uprising of the poor, and it's an uprising of people, um, of young people, of the young poor, people that are, either unemployed or locked in shitty jobs, largely people of color, of different ethnicities, but not exclusively so. It's been a very multiracial uprising. One of the big ways I could first tell that was um, just how many unfamiliar faces there were. They're not the usual list of activists you see at rallies and demos. Lots and lots of young people. When the mass looting started, because the third precinct is right across the street from a strip mall that has a couple grocery stores and a Target and a few other little stores that you might find in poorer working class neighborhoods. It was young parents pulling out diapers and clothes for their kids and games and toys, and then the other stores that got looted were the kinds of stores that poor people spend all their money at, usually the little that we have. So it was very stark to me, the section of the class that came out, and it was very clear that's who it was. And any of this talk that it was driven by anything else is just totally untrue.
One thing that struck me is that over the last 4 years, there's been a real rise in like the pressure from the far, far right, including outright fascists, and very little response from the other direction. And so I wonder, well, it seems to me that this is the start of the push in the other direction. Well, this plus the strikes and protests around COVID-19, but this in a really sharp way. What do you think of that, and would you like to comment on it?
Yeah, there's a few different things to say about that. One is I think you're right. Like, one of the things when this COVID crisis started, one of the things that I think I was nervous about politically was that while sort of, if you want to call it the left part of society was taking the virus seriously and trying to think about it scientifically, and trying to take precautions, and maybe pushing for their workplaces to be taking precautions, and in the best cases organizing strikes and stuff. It was the right that was getting out in the street, right? It was the right that was like putting pressure on the government and was sort of like rattling their sabers. And so right away I started thinking, this is a bad scene. It's a bad scene where the right is in the streets and we're kind of in our homes. But it wasn't clear kind of what would change that dynamic. And I think this has changed it. We'll see, the risks involved in terms of mass mobilizations. But yeah, I think you're right that this was the working classes asserting themselves in a way that makes not only the powers that be uncomfortable, but all the different layers of people that are used to defending the powers that be, or trying to get up in that system. One other quick thing about the far right too, to note and for us to think about, is that a few of them have been showing up at the 3rd Precinct. And for a variety of different reasons, because there's different types of far rightists and fascists. There was a guy in the midst of because one of the big activities was people massing around the 3rd Precinct, like this occupied, or like an occupation outpost, right? So the people are sort of surrounding it. There's police on the roofs shooting tear gas, chalk markers, and rubber bullets. My son got hit by a rubber bullet. It bounced off the street and hit him in the face. He's okay, but lots of people got hit. One of the guys that he worked with at the restaurant he used to work at got his skull shattered, we found out, from either a tear gas canister or a rubber bullet. But while that was going on, one night I looked over and I saw this weird flag, and I couldn't picture what it was, but this white guy was waving a flag. And later I found out it's this symbol, this thing called the boogaloo, which is term that the far rightists are using for basically civil war or kick it off, insurrection kind of thing. And if I had remembered what it was, I would have gone over to challenge him, but there was so much going on, I didn't even have a chance to go over and question him. And, but to be honest, he was participating in the militancy next to everyone else and wasn't, so it's confusing what his role was. There were a couple other 3%ers, and I don't know for sure they were members of 3%, but if you don't know, the 3% is kind of this constitutionalist militia who aren't sort of the racialist Nazi types, but the right-wing constitutionalist types, Second Amendment guys, and that kind of thing. And I confronted them because as we were walking up, and they assured me, apparently extremely sincerely, that they were there because they were really upset about what happened to George Floyd and wanted to stand up against it. And there was another incident where some armed militia guys showed up during the march. I wasn't there at that point, but a friend of mine was, a Latino guy, and he witnessed some black guys check these guys. And they gave the same rap. They said, "We know we look like rednecks, but we're here to support you." And now they largely disappeared once the looting started. I think they have such a religious attachment to property that they have a hard time with that. And I'm not at all calling for any kind of unity with them or anything like that, but I think it's an issue we need to think about in terms of these uprisings.
There's a long article in the Bellingcat.
Someone just sent it to me.
Yeah, about the Boogaloo, and there is a debate amongst them, evidently, because some of them are not overt racists,
right?
And they hate the cops more than or they hate the government more than they hate anybody else,
right?
And it's not class based. There's a dose of libertarianism in
for
there.
Sure.
Right-wing libertarianism.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing I should mention is that there were some antagonistic rightists too. There were some vigilante types driving around, and there was a report of a guy that ran his truck into a crowd of people, and he was let go by the police apparently, and he did it again a second time.
There's a video.
There's other reports.
There's a video I saw of somebody driving a car into somebody, and the driver actually swerved out of the way, made like a 90-degree turn in order to hit this person.
Yeah. And there's a crew of Proud Boys, which is a really nasty little group that were, again, they're sort of staying way at the outskirts, and the outskirts is hard because of the uprising has become so sort of generalized around the city. The outskirts are like miles away from the 3rd Precinct now. But there's reports of these right-wing vigilantes that are clearly anti the movement that was going on. But it's also interesting that at least initially there were these rightists that wanted to join and seemingly sincerely wanted to join it too.
Yeah, I don't want to, but it's an interesting thing to note. But the main thing to me is, I remember during the Occupy movement, how once it got started, it just sharply reversed the whole political dialogue and the consciousness in the country. And
I agree.
So I think it seems to me that it will very likely do the same thing.
I agree. I know you can see there's already militant protests kicking off around the country. I think encouraged by Minneapolis.
I think there's also a potential for the capitalist class to really be split between one wing that's going to say this shows we need to crack down all the harder, and the majority wing saying, look, things are going too far. We need unity in the country. We have to stop the racist pot from boiling over. It's okay for it to simmer on the back burner, but we don't want it to boil over, that sort of thing. What do you think of that?
I think that's totally right. You already see it between the sort of dispute between the sort of Minnesota local authorities and Trump. And then the problem will be, though, is that, you know, given COVID and this recession / depression that's upon us, where are the resources going to come from that are going to, you know, alleviate what people are demanding? Because clearly it's not just about putting this cop in prison, though that's certainly a popular demand of everyone. But, you know, the uprising itself just shows how alienated people were from the entire system, from the entire economy, and also there's going to be a need to rebuild stuff in Minneapolis. You know, there's going to be a massive need for grocery stores and community centers and all those kinds of things. So I think these liberal politicians who want to co-opt stuff are going to, you know, their words don't really mean much anymore, you know, if they're not backed up by anything. So it'll be interesting to see. One other point, semi-related to that, I guess, is, you know, because Minnesota is ruled by the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, and Minneapolis, it has been my entire lifetime. So that's who the authority is in the state. And one thing that's interesting is the first night of the revolt, when people were, you know, clashing with the police, exchanging projectiles, that kind of thing. I think one liquor store got broken into, but, you know, there was this fighting spirit that was evident. The police were initially criticized for shooting so much at the protesters, and the police chief, who's a youngish local African-American guy, said, well, we didn't want to lose the 3rd precinct. There's a lot of guns in the 3rd precinct, and we don't want to lose the 3rd precinct. And I was thinking to myself, well, I don't know that any of us had really even thought that was a possibility. But here they are thinking about that possibility. And then with the National Guard, when Walz, the governor, brought in the National Guard, people criticized, why didn't they go right to the 3rd precinct? He said, because we first had to secure the state capitol in St. Paul. So it's interesting that the ruling class in some ways has a less problem picturing our potential than we do, you know?
Right. So, and how do you see the role of the unions in all of this?
Well, there could be a significant role, but there's been none, or virtually none. I think, you know, Socialist Alternative gets a little credit or they do get the credit because they run the bus drivers union here, or their people are due.
Is that right?
They got a motion. They refused to drive any prisoners, and they said that, and so they got the International to back them on that stand, that they wouldn't, because the cops like to use the city buses to put mass arrests on. Now, I have to be honest, I don't know how much of that was driven by solidarity or safety concerns amongst the ranks of the bus drivers.
According to the report that I read, it was the individual drivers that took that initiative, and the union officialdom did not organize it. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know that. I don't know about that, but I do know that the local here is the president is a Socialist Alternative member, and at least another person on the executive board is. So I can't speak to where the initiative came from and whether it was driven by solidarity with the protests or safety concerns, you know. But I mean, so that's commendable, and I think there are individual union members who come out on the actions, but there's not been unions mobilizing their members to be there. There haven't been unions putting demands on the state. There haven't been unions shutting stuff down in solidarity with the protests. These are the sort of basic things that you think a union that's fighting for the working class would be thinking about trying to do.
Like here in Oakland, all the protests over the years around these sorts of issues, I mean, the unions have been almost totally missing in action.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been no real drive by the union leadership, with one exception of one local. There's been no real drive by the union leadership to mobilize its membership.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say it's something similar there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few locals that generally try and mobilize for each other and for generally in solidarity, and I think are trying to do good things. But overall, the labor movement, especially around issues concerning the dispossessed and the poor and young people of color, are absent. And I think that's widespread across the entire labor movement. I think, and it's even down to individual union members too. I think that there's still a lot of division within the class between. I had a lot of debates with coworkers about the looting, for instance. So it's an issue, I think, within the class, but certainly the labor movement is missing in action.
Where do you think things are going to go from here, there in Minneapolis, Kieran?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, the uprising was a spontaneous thing, right? It wasn't. There weren't organizations. There wasn't coalitions of organizations. There wasn't sort of different trends debating, which direction for the movement. It was really this mass movement of young poor people. So what that means is that there isn't political organization yet to sort of defend that part of the class, or for that part of the class to sort of speak in an organized way. So it means that there's going to be some kind of backlash, and it'll be interesting to see how people organize to face that. And I think the backlash is going to be from both sides of that class divide, or that divide within the ruling class that you explained. So there's going to be both a carrot and stick coming at people. And I think part of the job for radicals will be to try and confront both of those things and prepare people to deal with both of those things. I'm not sure the particulars of it. I mean, one of the cops has been charged just as of today. The other 3 haven't. But again, all these other issues beyond this one police murder have been opened up by the uprising.
There's going to be a strong attempt to channel all of this into getting Biden elected, I think.
Yeah, for sure. For sure there will be. And I think the Democratic Party, or in Minnesota, it's the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, they're cautious. One of the reasons why they've been somewhat cautious about mass arrests and really trying to smash this movement is that they're concerned from alienation from the Black community. So we'll see how that plays out, though. I mean, I think it probably will mean that there will have to be Black people playing the point position in repression of the Black community,
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think people are more prepared for, but still not many people aren't prepared for that in terms of figuring that out politically.
Any final thoughts, Kieran?
I mean, I've never been in this I've never been a participant or a observer of this kind of revolt before, and it's amazing. It's amazing to me. It shows the capacity and the courage and the confidence of people in the working class, and of people in the the most beaten down sections of the working class. And I think a lot of people in the society, or the mainstream society, wants to pretend these people don't exist. And it's beautiful when when people assert themselves on the stage, so to speak. You know, it's beautiful.
Well, thank you very much, Kieran.
All right.